Within official royal portraits, her visage is perpetually positioned at the periphery, near enough to carry weight, yet never distinct enough to be etched in memory. Diana's grandmother, Lady Cynthia Spencer, spent 35 years serving alongside the Queen Mother. The single possession she adamantly refused to abandon sheds light on why Diana was doomed from the start. Her service spanned some of the most volatile episodes in modern royal history, positioning her to observe what remained hidden from public view. Her discretion was so absolute that she carried every secret into the grave. She never discussed it, never committed it to paper, and never violated the code of secrecy instilled in her from an early age. Yet a recurring detail emerges in later testimonies from staff who served within those royal residences. Cynthia Spencer faded from memory not due to irrelevance. She was permitted to vanish precisely because she had become indispensable. For when you serve for decades as one of the monarch's most trusted aides, you do more than simply observe history. You become the individual summoned whenever history requires discreet handling. And upon the death of such figures, the ensuing public hush provokes unsettling inquiries. This chronicles a woman who lived through the reigns of 3 kings and 2 global conflicts, and who witnessed the gradual disintegration of the very world she was destined to uphold. A woman whose granddaughter would later recall sensing her protective presence, despite their lives intersecting only briefly. A woman who made a decision that Diana would devote her entire existence to fleeing. She prioritized allegiance over honesty, duty over personal identity, and the establishment above all else. Insiders within the royal household refer to her as the monarchy's safeguard, while royal historians observe that she perpetuated the recurring pattern. And by the conclusion, you must decide if that decision made her a guardian of a worthy cause, or merely the initial link in a chain that would ultimately suffocate her granddaughter. In 1897, England, the year of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, Cynthia Hamilton entered a world that was commemorating 6 decades of imperial supremacy. Spanning a quarter of the earth, the British Empire saw its nobility convinced that their ancestral lineage rendered them naturally superior. Young women such as Cynthia were brought up with a single directive. Their purpose was to reinforce the established order, not to challenge it. Born into ancient nobility, her family tree was intricately interwoven with royalty across generations, thanks to calculated marital unions and carefully chosen godparents. In such households, children were taught to curtsy even before they mastered the alphabet. Cynthia's upbringing involved shuttling between magnificent country manners and the London social circuit, observing women glide through ballrooms as graceful apparitions. Though they were always present at significant events, they were never truly remembered in any. Her education included French, piano, and needlework abilities aimed not at her own fulfillment, but at rendering her marriageable, practical, and ornamental enough to elevate another's standing. However, Cynthia possessed a keenness that surpassed what her prescribed role demanded. She observed details that others overlooked. She noticed how her mother's expression turned vacant whenever men engaged in political talk, not due to ignorance, but because of a practiced invisibility. She observed that noble marriages were talked about as if they were corporate mergers, with terms like advantageous connection and suitable arrangement substituting for any hint of love. She realized the women in her sphere belonged to 2 groups: those who faded silently into matrimony, and those who vanished dramatically through divorce, scandal, or exile. No alternative existed. No route allowed a woman to stay both seen and whole. Thus, Cynthia decided early on. Instead of rebelling, she would make herself essential by demonstrating capability. She intended to master the regulations so completely that there would never be a need to violate them. She aimed to be the individual without whom they simply could not operate. And for 75 years, that is precisely what she became. Cynthia Hamilton was 17 at the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. The conflict was expected to conclude by Christmas. Recruitment posters depicted immaculate soldiers in uniform striding toward renown, Young women like Cynthia were supposed to wave handkerchiefs at railway stations and calmly await their men's heroic homecoming. Instead, Cynthia headed to the hospitals, not the upscale facilities where officers recuperated in private quarters, but field hospitals where troop trains discharged soldiers who had endured months in the trenches, infested with lice, amputated, traumatized into muteness. She had never been meant to witness such horrors. Neither was anyone else. The entire war campaign relied on the public remaining oblivious to the true impact of modern weaponry on the human body. Yet, Cynthia saw it all regardless. She assisted by holding basins as surgeons conducted procedures without anesthesia due to depleted medical supplies. She penned correspondence for soldiers missing hands, eyes, and even the capacity to recall their own identities. She remained at the bedsides of troops, slowly perishing not from their injuries, but from infections that penicillin, still 3 decades away, could have cured. Thus, she discovered a truth that would shape her entire future. Those who keep institutional structures functioning never receive the recognition they deserve. Medals were awarded to generals. Politicians delivered grand speeches. Nurses received only occasional mentions in newspaper accolades. However, women like Cynthia, who arranged supply lines, handled logistics, and sustained entire hospital sections while physicians collapsed from fatigue, were anticipated to labor quietly and vanish once hostilities ceased. And that is precisely what she did. For in 1919, after the conflict concluded and all sought to erase the memories, Cynthia Hamilton wed into one of England's mightiest dynasties, subsequently vanishing behind her new title. Albert Edward John, Spencer Viscount Althorp, later Earl Spencer, embodied the system's ideal. He possessed a title, wealth, and royal connections forged through centuries of calculated unions. Society columns described the wedding as a love match, as they always did, yet for families like the Spencers, matrimony represented a commercial agreement concealed beneath white lace. One married to unite influence, combine properties, and generate successors who would inherit both ranks and the duty to maintain them. Romance, when present, was merely ornamental and non-essential. Cynthia assumed the title of Viscountess Althorp. Later, upon her father-in-law's death, she became Countess Spencer, mistress of Althorp House, among England's most magnificent estates. Its every chamber steeped in 5 centuries of Spencer lineage. She ought to have felt a sense of authority. Instead, she felt akin to a curator imprisoned within a museum she could not escape. For managing Althorp was not merely residing there, it was about perpetuating a facade. Each room needed to appear flawless for the tours and garden parties, events that showcased the ongoing importance of the Spencers. Each dinner party was required to strengthen their standing within the social order. Any public appearance had to convey that noble families remained vital to England's sense of itself. Cynthia, intelligent, weary, and growing more isolated, became the one who made everything appear effortless. She oversaw the household staff. She organized the occasions that maintained the Spencers' social prominence. She brought up her children with the same formal detachment she herself had experienced, since affection was a privilege, and she had learned that self-preservation demanded strictness. Her husband had his own interests, clubs, hunting trips, and a life that moved alongside hers but seldom crossed paths. Cynthia had her own role, ensuring everything functioned smoothly while acting as if she were not the driving force. She earned admiration from others for this. They described her as competent, methodical, and steadfast. However, those who served in those stately homes during that period later recounted a different trait: women who never shouted, yet their quietness could chill an entire room. They kept perfect poise in public, yet were known to stand by themselves in vacant libraries once everyone else had retired, simply standing motionless, as though searching for something they had misplaced but could not identify. Cynthia disciplined herself to require less nourishment, less sleep, less emotional comfort, since needing anything signified frailty. She gradually discovered that the cost of being essential was that nobody ever inquired whether you desired that position from the beginning. Yet in 1937, an event occurred that ought to have confirmed that all her sacrifices were worthwhile. She was named Woman of the Bedchamber to Queen Elizabeth, the consort of King George VI. This was among the greatest honors a woman could be granted, evidence that years of devotion had been acknowledged, that she had secured her spot within the royal inner circle. And this marked the start of her most perilous period. What the general public often fails to grasp regarding royal attendants is this: they are not merely symbolic figures. Their role is entirely operational. The position of a woman of the bedchamber was not a ceremonial title taken for its prestige, to be attended to just twice annually. It granted daily proximity to the Queen. It involved being present in private moments when decisions were made, decisions that would never find their way into any official documentation. Cynthia assumed this position in 1937, mere months after the abdication crisis that had brought the monarchy to the brink of collapse. In December 1936, King Edward VIII declared his abdication in order to marry Wallis Simpson, an American woman who had been divorced. Today, the official narrative has been sanitized, presented as a love story, a king who prioritized his heart over his duty. However, when Cynthia arrived at the royal household, the panic was still palpable. Edward VIII's abdication was far from romantic. It had been a full-blown constitutional crisis, because Edward's desire wasn't simply to marry Wallis. He wanted to do so while retaining his kingship. He expected the Church of England, which, as monarch, he would lead to sanction his marriage to a woman twice divorced. He sought to overturn centuries of precedent simply because he believed the rules did not apply to him. When his family, his government, and his advisors all made it clear that this was impossible, he walked away, leaving his younger brother George VI, a man who stuttered and had never desired the crown, who had spent his entire life assuming he would never have to be king, to gather the fragments left behind. Cynthia Spencer served through that aftermath, not appearing in the famous photographs, not recorded in the historical accounts, but she was close enough to the turmoil to witness what the public never saw: the fear and the resentment that simmered beneath the surface. She was under pressure to appear stable while everything inside was falling apart, and she acted exactly as her training dictated. She never spoke a word to anyone about it, as that was the price she had agreed to pay. You were granted access to those in power and had the opportunity to observe history in the making. In return, you gave up any claim to ever reveal the truth of your experiences. The inner circle of the household refers to that as loyalty, but Cynthia Spencer saw it as duty. Years later, Diana, her granddaughter, would give it a different name: complicity. However, we haven't reached that point yet, as the following detail explains why royal historians continue to debate privately. This isn't a matter of Cynthia being overlooked, rather, it's about the danger that comes with recalling her. A second war emerged, another period of crisis. This decision would determine precisely the type of woman Cynthia Spencer had turned into and the kind of woman Diana would be brought up to become. In 1940, as Germany started bombing London, the government devised evacuation strategies for the royal family. King George VI and Queen Elizabeth were meant to withdraw to the countryside, leaving Buckingham Palace secured yet vacant. The monarchy's survival strategy involved concealment, but Queen Elizabeth declined, and Cynthia Spencer remained by her side. She had the option to withdraw. Most people would have taken it, and she had already lived through one world war. She had earned the privilege of being safe, yet she didn't retreat because Cynthia had done the math. Years before, the sole path to being valued was to stay when everyone else was running away. To have significance, you had to be the one who remained. While other noble families escaped to their countryside homes, Cynthia stayed behind in London. She assisted in coordinating the women who were left behind, those managing households solo, raising kids in air raid shelters, striving to preserve order as every known system crumbled. She transformed Althorpe House into a hub for coordination. She resolved conflicts among individuals who were completely drained, left only with anxiety and a refusal to yield. She composed messages to mothers and fathers whose boys had been lost in combat, employing words so precisely chosen that they offered solace without falsehood. And all the while, Luftwaffe bombers roared so near that the sound of their engines was unmistakable to her ears. But this is the part nobody mentions. Cynthia Spencer wasn't courageous. She was utterly depleted. For many years, she had been the pillar upon which everyone else leaned. And once you become that person, the choice to simply stop ceases to exist. Quitting would mean acknowledging your humanity, admitting your fear, confessing that the burden has become unbearable, and women like Cynthia were never permitted to make such confessions. Thus, she pressed onward. She endured the air raids, the scarcity of supplies, and those sleepless nights when every sound could have signaled her end. And when the conflict finally concluded in 1945, while the world around her rejoiced, Cynthia Spencer experienced something entirely different. A profound relief at having made it through, mixed with a deep dread that survival meant going back to a life that had worn her down long before the war began. The years following the war should have brought some ease. The battles had concluded. The king's speech impediment had transformed from an embarrassing flaw into a relatable sign of human fragility, and the royal family had endured by staying present during the bombings. And the choice of Queen Elizabeth not to flee had come to define what it meant to be a dutiful monarch. Cynthia had rightfully earned her role in that story. She had fulfilled her responsibilities through times of crisis and remained faithful when faithfulness came with great risk. Yet the aristocratic system doesn't grant rest for past loyalty. It merely piles on fresh obligations. Because while Cynthia was working to keep the nation united, her own household was gradually disintegrating. Her son, John Spencer, who would later become Diana's father, married Frances Roche in 1954. The ceremony was magnificent, and every photo came out flawlessly. After a few years, the union began falling apart not in a dramatic or public fashion, but through the gradual, resentful decline typical of noble unions. When both parties understood, they had been promised a fairy tale but were handed a legal agreement. John was distant and domineering. Cynthia had brought him up with the same emotional detachment she herself experienced in childhood, as that was the tradition. People repeat the behaviors that molded them, even when those habits feel stifling. Frances was far too young, only 18 at the time of her wedding, to John, who was 30 years old. She was chosen based on her lineage and her capacity to bear children, not for how well she matched a man who equated love with proper execution of responsibilities. The couple had 4 kids. Diana came third. Cynthia observed the unfolding situation with the bleak awareness of someone who had already experienced this narrative. That pattern defined every Spencer union, a vicious cycle that had ensnared the family for generations. Wedding for political gain, bearing heirs, faking contentment, just enduring, yet Frances shattered that mold. In 1969, she departed, abandoning the marriage. Althorpe, and her children since remaining, would have meant total loss of self. She opted for flight instead of annihilation. The uproar was immense. Noble wives were not supposed to leave, they were meant to endure, silently suffer, and seek diversions like extramarital affairs, alcohol, or obsessive gardening, but never desert their duties. But Frances did just that. Cynthia Spencer, who had devoted her whole existence to the belief that loyalty required enduring anything, saw her daughter-in-law make a different choice. Did she feel admiration for Frances? Bitterness? Did she see her own escape in Frances's flight? That remains unknown. Cynthia never revealed her thoughts. Cynthia Spencer never shared her feelings, never reflected, never challenged the framework she had upheld for 7 decades. Her only response was to continue serving, even when that service involved observing her own son bring up his children with the same emotional chill that characterized her own child-rearing, even when it meant seeing her granddaughter Diana, sensitive, emotional, craving love, grow up in a home where affection was based on conduct rather than unconditional acceptance. Even when it meant being aware, in the hidden recesses of her own psyche that she had suppressed long ago, that this pattern would ruin Diana, just as it had almost ruined her. Although the official cause of death was listed as cancer, the specific details remained confidential. The announcement of death was made using formal language, peacefully, surrounded by family phrases that concealed any mention of suffering, fear, or the gradual deterioration that truly occurred. She kept performing her royal responsibilities right up until her final days, appearing at events, posing for photos, and embodying the role she had mastered over 70 years. Upon her death, Buckingham Palace issued no public statement. There was no tribute offered by the Queen, whom she had faithfully served for 35 years. No recognition was given that one of the most devoted women in royal service had just passed away. At that time, Diana was just 11 years old. She wept with the bewildering, intense grief of a child who loses a beloved figure they never truly comprehended. Many years afterward, when Diana found herself ensnared in her own royal marriage, she often said she sensed her grandmother's presence not in a literal or mystical sense, but rather as a comforting influence, a link to someone who truly comprehended the experience of being exploited by institutions that never sought your consent. Diana came into possession of Cynthia's tiara, the Spencer family heirloom that had adorned the heads of Spencer women at weddings and royal occasions for generations. In 1981, when she wed Prince Charles, Diana decided to wear that very tiara. She declined both the Cambridge Lovers' Knot tiara offered by the Queen and any newly commissioned piece. Instead, she chose her grandmother's tiara, the jewelry of a woman who had dedicated 75 years to serving the monarchy, and who was permitted to slip from public memory as soon as she passed away. Those within the household described it as mere sentimentality, a touching homage, but perhaps it signified something deeper. Perhaps that was Diana's initial subtle act of defiance. She wore a constant reminder that the monarchy devours its most loyal female servants, only to discard them when they are no longer useful. Now you must confront this question. Did she defend the monarchy out of genuine conviction, or because she had invested so much of herself that she couldn't admit it was unworthy of protection? Did she remain silent about the brutality she observed because loyalty required it? Or did speaking out equate to acknowledging that her whole existence rested upon a falsehood? Did she genuinely care for Diana? Or did she view Diana merely as another Spencer woman groomed for sacrifice, opting for institutional loyalty instead of stepping in? For Cynthia had alternatives. They were limited. None were simple. Yet choices existed. She could have documented her observations in writing. She could have revealed to Diana the true price of serving the crown. She had the chance to halt the recurring pattern rather than continuing it. But she chose not to. She remained faithful to the establishment. She safeguarded the hidden truths. She raised her son to be emotionally distant because she herself had been raised that way, and passing on trauma proved simpler than resolving it. 3 decades after her death, her granddaughter would meet her end while trying to escape the same. Cynthia Spencer had devoted her life to safeguarding the institution. Was she a protector, or merely the first link in a chain destined to eventually suffocate Diana? You do not have to choose now, but you will. By the story's conclusion, because the final chapter is no longer about Cynthia, it is about what she brought into existence, what she enabled, and whether allegiance to a flawed system makes you noble or complicit in everything that system demolishes. If you do not subscribe, you will not see the next name until it has already been erased from the narrative. That is how this operates. In 1995, Princess Diana sat for An interview with Martin Bashir on the BBC program Panorama. A viewership of 23 million tuned in. That interview was the most explosive royal conversation in contemporary history. Diana spoke about her bulimia, her husband's infidelity, and the emotional coldness of the institution she had married into. Then she said something most people did not fully grasp. There were 3 individuals in this marriage. Everyone assumed she was referring to Camilla Parker Bowles. And indeed, that was true. But there was also a 4th presence in that marriage, one Diana never named directly, the specter of every Spencer woman who came before her, every woman trained to smile through suffering, to serve without complaint, to disappear behind duty. The ghost of Cynthia. Spencer, because Diana had not just married into dysfunction, she was raised in it, shaped by it. The Spencer family had been performing aristocratic perfection for generations. Cynthia was among those upholding that facade while inwardly falling apart. John Spencer was raised by Cynthia with emotional detachment, mirroring her own upbringing. John repeated the pattern with Diana, who, starved for warmth and craving affection, entered a royal union convinced that love must be earned by flawless conduct. Diana was not the origin of this cycle. It began with women, such as Cynthia, who prioritized institutional loyalty over shielding those harmed by those very institutions. By the time, Diana realized the trap only when escape meant self-destruction. This is what Cynthia Spencer knew but deliberately ignored. She was aware that aristocratic unions were based on transactions. She had experienced such a marriage herself. She understood the monarchy required silence regarding pain. She had upheld that silence for many decades. She recognized that the Spencer household fostered children through discipline rather than warmth. She had followed that practice herself. And she knew, must have known, that Diana was different, too delicate for this realm, too truthful for these establishments. Yet Cynthia passed away in 1972, when Diana was just 11, far too soon to step in, yet too late to have raised her any differently. Perhaps she would have remained uninvolved, even if she had survived. Cynthia Spencer had made her decision 7 decades prior. She selected the system over her own well-being. Once you commit to that path, having poured your whole identity into sustaining an institution, you cannot concede that institution is not worth saving. Such an admission would mean acknowledging that your entire life was in vain. Your sacrifices achieved nothing. Your loyalty was directed wrongly. And Cynthia Spencer never doubted her allegiance, not in public, and likely not even in her own thoughts. She remained in service to the monarchy until her final day. She safeguarded its secrets and executed her part without fault. 13 years after she passed away, her granddaughter was offered up to the very same monarchy as the next victim. The Spencer tiara Diana wore on her wedding day was more than mere adornment. It represented a legacy, a bequest, and a caution she only grasped when it was already too late. This tiara had graced the heads of countless Spencer women before her, women who wed out of obligation, bore children, feigned contentment while drowning inside, and endured by fading into the background. Diana put it on believing she was paying tribute to her grandmother, imagining a bond with a woman who truly comprehended the essence of duty. In truth, she was willingly signing up for an identical destiny. The tiara embodied all that Cynthia had come to accept, that personal worth derived from being useful to systems indifferent to your human dignity. Loyalty demanded silence, while duty required enduring pain in silence. She wore it during her wedding ceremony, at formal state banquets, and for portraits that would be duplicated countless times. Later, she removed it not with any dramatic flair or public symbolic act, but discreetly and in private. She ceased wearing it around the period when she began openly discussing her marriage, recognized that the fairy tale was actually a prison, and came to see that remaining loyal to systems that crush you is not honorable. It is self-destruction. Diana abandoned the part Cynthia had mastered, and the monarchy, which had endured for ages by devouring compliant women like Cynthia, who never resisted, was utterly unprepared for a woman who declined to vanish. On the 31st of August 1997, Diana Spencer passed away. She was just 36 years old. According to the official account, she perished in a Paris car crash while trying to escape photographers. It was a tragedy, an accident. What remains indisputable is that Diana perished within a system that encouraged harassment, fueled fixation, and regarded her entire existence as communal property. A mechanism that had conditioned her from a young age to equate worth with public visibility, only to penalize her for becoming too exposed. She had informed the world that her marriage was devoid of substance. She revealed the chill that lay beyond the palace walls. Her genuine connections with people made the monarchy seem outdated and harsh in contrast. She accomplished all of this without ever agreeing to remain quiet. She violated the single rule that Cynthia Spencer had followed for 75 years. She spoke honestly. The royal family didn't have to plan Diana's demise. They had established a framework. The intense combination of demands, monitoring, and penalties for being genuine transformed her existence into a pursuit she could never succeed in. It happened to Cynthia Spencer in the same manner. However, Diana resisted, and that changed everything. For when Diana passed away, the entire globe grieved. Even after 27 years, her name, her image, and her determination not to vanish remain in people's memories. Yet what about Cynthia Spencer? The majority of individuals are unaware of her existence. Perhaps that isn't coincidental. Perhaps that is the outcome when one serves loyally, holds secrets, and passes away without causing a stir. To those familiar with the workings of the palace, the subsequent public quietness came as a relief. They left her behind with the same efficiency with which they had utilized her, and the lesson was unmistakable. This is the fate of women who serve us devotedly. We devour you, allow you to vanish, and then proceed to the next person. A legacy is what one leaves that organizations are unable to wipe out. During her 35 years serving the royal family, Cynthia Spencer never wrote a memoir, kept a diary, or made public any account of what she saw. People who were close to the household later recalled that Cynthia deliberately avoided creating any written records. There were no written statements of her observations, no admissions, and no documents whatsoever. The royal household compensated her for keeping quiet and subsequently demonstrated precisely the value of that silence. Rather than records, she bequeathed a recurring pattern, a cycle. It was a system that trained Spencer women to remain faithful to organizations that would ultimately be their undoing. Diana, however, shattered that cycle. She did so imperfectly and at great personal expense, but in a definitive manner. When expected to remain quiet, she instead spoke the truth. She displayed her weaknesses when the expectation was to project strength. She opted for being seen over ensuring her own safety. And she paid for that choice with her life. Yet, there was something the monarchy had not foreseen. Diana's passing did not conclude the narrative. Rather, it laid it bare. Upon her death, countless individuals began raising inquiries that had never previously been posed. Questions concerning the royal establishment she had joined and the framework that had let her down. Inquiries into how the monarchy uses women as instruments and casts them aside once they are no longer of service. These same questions continue to be posed 27 years on, and they will persist as long as there are those who recall what royal historians record. 有不少人更希望你忘记，像新西亚、斯宾塞这样的女性，曾无私奉献却毫无回报，而你效忠于腐败的体制。这让你也成了他们腐败行径的共谋。沉默并非高贵，而是缴械投降。戴安娜深谙此理，尽管明白得太晚，未能挽救自己，却足够及时地改变了后续的一切。 因为戴安娜并非单纯离世，她留下了铁证。采访、纪录片、公开档案，全部记录了这个王室究竟如何对待那些信赖她的女人。也正因这些证据，我们至今仍在议论她。她的面容依然为人所识，她的经历并未像辛西娅那样被世人遗忘，因为戴安娜拒绝缄默不语。正因她的拒绝，任何人都无法像任由她祖母无声淹没那样，将她也从记忆中抹去。那么，最后这个问题，请你思考：辛西娅，斯宾塞的忠心究竟值得吗？他75年的效劳，到底守护了什么珍贵之物？还是仅仅让那个体制继续苟活，最终足以毁灭他的孙女？他的沉默是否为他镀上了高尚的光环？还是他成了第一张倒下的骨牌，最终引发了戴安娜的殒命？我无法替你作答，但有一件事我可以告诉你。据王室史学家所言，有人更希望你从未提出这些疑问，他们宁可让辛西娅·斯宾塞继续被遗忘，让戴安娜之死永远只是一场不幸事故。他们希望无人识破那个模式，这个体制如何利用女人，然后又将其弃如敝屣。他们多么希望你已转去追逐下一个丑闻、下一位名人、下一场消遣。Yet your presence here indicates you are not moving forward, so the process of erasure ends at this point. For decades, she dedicated her service to the crown. Upon her death, the crown remained silent. That is not a tradition. That is a clear message. She was once erased by them. If you scroll past at this moment, you are assisting them in completing the task. Please subscribe, as she merited more than 75 years of loyalty being answered with silence. Furthermore, Diana deserved a better fate than perishing in a system that her grandmother devoted her life to safeguarding. Keep them in your memory. Her blurring was not an accident. They obscured her because a sharp image would prompt unwanted inquiries.